Hey guys, welcome back to another book review. Today we're going to be talking about The Help by Catherine Stockett, not sure yet, but first off I'm just going to say this book is amazing. I've given it a 4.5 out of 5 stars on Goodreads, and it's just outstandingly written, outstandingly told, and a wonderful, more adult fiction book than it is a YA. Not only adult fiction, it's a little bit of historical fiction because it takes place in between 1962 to 1964 in the town of Jackson, Mississippi, and we'll get into a lot of that later. First, let's talk about my impressions of the book. Holy heck, absolutely amazing. I mean, the way that the characters were written, they jumped off the page, they were real people, and a lot of that for me, I think, had to deal with where I'm from. And no, I'm not actually from Mississippi. I'm from North Carolina originally, and a lot of the stuff in this book was kind of real. I'm not born in the 60s either. Don't give me that look. And the way they talked, the way everything was written, the fact that there's mentions of southern towns and plantations and lady leagues and a lot of stuff, I understood just because of where I came from. But the writing style, which is told in first person, is outstanding because it follows 3 separate characters throughout the entire book. Each chapter, except for one, is told from the perspective of these 3 characters. We have Abilene, Minnie, and Skeeter, whose name is Eugenia. Skeeter is a nickname. So, I was just astounded at how Catherine was able to make the 3 characters completely different, though they're all Southern ladies. And we're going to get into how interesting this ends up becoming in a little bit when I talk about the characters, because the characters are the driving force behind the story. A little bit of history. The 60s is after the Rosa Parks thing, but not quite. We're not quite at the point of equal rights yet for the white and the black communities in America, especially Jackson, Mississippi, where most, if not all, of the black community is in hard labor or in maid service. The Help, the title of the book. And so it's really interesting to see them tell these stories about working for the white ladies and the different perspectives and just how they interacted during a very volatile time in American history. So now we're going to get into the characters. So like I said, we have 3 characters that we're introduced to. First we have Abilene. Second, we have Minnie, and third, we have Skeeter, who I said is also Eugenia in the story, so don't get that confused. 2 of the characters, Abilene and Minnie, work in the Help service. They are actually maids to white families in the community of Jackson, Mississippi. So Skeeter lives on one of the few remaining cotton plantations during the time, which employs a fair amount of black people. And it's a very interesting dynamic between the 3 characters. We'll get into that, but first I'm going to go through the story of the 3 characters because the whole book is told from their perspectives. And first we'll start with Abilene because she is the first character we meet. So Abilene, like I've said, is a maid. She works for the Leafold family, and her, specialty as a maid is dealing with babies, which is really wonderful because the lady she works for doesn't want a dang thing to do with her own kids. So we follow Abilene, and she talks about how she works for the kids, her interactions with this family with a woman who, A, doesn't want her to raise her own kids, and then having to deal with the children more so relying on her than they do their own mother. A lot of the driving force between Abilene wanting to work with the kids is that she has actually lost her own son 2 years prior to the start of the story in a work accident. And she obviously misses him terribly, and just, it's a sad story how that ended up happening, but for the time period that the story takes place in, it's not uncommon to have this kind of stuff happen. So Aibileen goes through the story talking about how she works with the Leafold family, and then eventually running into Miss Skeeter, who is actually a friend of her employer, and they kind of start talking, and eventually it comes to this point where there's a book that's going to be written. Miss Skeeter is the author, and Aibileen is the first person that she ends up interviewing and rounding up a lot of the other maids to help write the story, pretty much about the experiences of Black people working in Jackson, Mississippi. By the end of the book, a lot has ended up changing for Aibileen in the way of work and her outlook on life, and it is a good ending for her because she's finally able to leave the life that she has, and everything is looking much brighter by the end of the book. Now, the second character we meet is Minnie, who is another maid. She has a problem of actually backsassing a lot of her employers, so she has a tendency to be fired. When we first meet her, she's working for the mother of another friend of the employer of Aibileen. And she ends up being called a thief and then losing that job. After a while, she ends up working out further in the country for a lady named Celia. And it's interesting to see the interaction between these two because Celia is not a very good housekeeper. She's kind of a Barbie on steroids, a little bit, a lot. And she can't clean, she can't cook. And for the longest time, Minnie was actually a secret from Celia's husband. Eventually, the husband finds Minnie, it's fine. There's this whole secret thing going on where Celia won't tell the husband, but the husband knows about Minnie, and it's just, I don't understand how they were able to keep this one straight without anyone dying. The big thing about Minnie is the fact that she is still married at this point, and she has 5 kids. So when Aibileen first approaches her about helping to write this book, she's very, very hesitant because of what could happen to her, and then by extension happening to her family, because, again, if you know anything about history, white people run this town, and they can do whatever they please, pretty much. But eventually Minnie finally gives in and then starts telling her stories, and through that, a lot of other people end up coming to help write the stories because of another maid named Yule May, who wanted to help, couldn't end up helping because she did actually steal a ring from her employer, who is Minnie's old employer, and now she's in jail. And through that one, a lot of other Black women, maids, come to help write the story. And it's interesting to see the different stories between, or the women like Aibileen that choose to move from family to family to family when they feel like their usefulness is done. The women like Minnie, which Minnie's probably the only one, and sasses her employers, and she's fired repeatedly over and over and over and over again. But everyone loves her cooking, so she keeps getting jobs. And the other maids that have stayed with one family for numerous years, like close to 30, 40 years. So the range that they get in the stories range from very good to really, really horrible situations that these maids have been put in and are forced to go through on a pretty much daily basis. The last character we will meet in the story is Skeeter, and she's one of the more interesting ones because, again, she is a white lady. She was raised on a southern plantation, so she has an air about her, though it's not the same as the other women in the town. She went to college, she ended up graduating, and she wants to be a writer or an editor. She wants something to do with the writing field. This is right after college for her. She has applied for a job up in New York, and the person in charge of the place she applied for has written her back saying, well, you have no work experience, but do you have any outstanding ideas that would make an interesting article, column, ends up being a book? And then that's when she starts talking to Aibileen about her dead son, who had the original idea of actually writing stories from the perspective of a black person in Jackson, Mississippi. So now Skeeter takes that and twists it to make it about the service in Jackson. So for a long time, the three characters are actually doing this in secret because things could happen to all of them based on what they're doing. And you see it happen a little bit throughout the story, especially with Skeeter when her friends find out that they don't exactly find out what she's doing, but they get really close to figuring it out. And then the book comes out. Not a lot of people are able to figure out that she's actually written about Jackson because they've decided to publish it, well, write it anonymously. They've changed all the names in the stories, though there's one detail that gives one of them away. And they changed the name of the town that they live in. But, you know, one character, Minnie's former employer's daughter, there we go, has pretty much vowed to figure out who wrote the story and oust them and cause a living nightmare for all of the other characters in the book. She kind of does, she kind of doesn't. She ends up backing off because of one particular story in there between her and Minnie that she doesn't want people to find out actually happened. So she finally ends up kind of giving up on that endeavor. But the book obviously does get published. The book ends up doing pretty well, and it's really amazing to see how, you know, it didn't exactly end the civil rights, but it was a ripple within the community of Jackson that started a lot of talk and a lot of changes. And like the tagline on the book says, you know, change begins with a whisper. So, would I recommend anyone reading this book? Yes. I do believe if you are reading this book, you have to go into it with an open mind because there is a lot of use of the N-word. So there's a lot of use of it. But again, in the context of the story, it makes sense because that's what they called them at the time. When you read the book, go into it with an open mind, understanding that this is a historical piece. While it's fiction, it is a glimpse onto the real life of what America was like in the 1960s, and understand where a lot of the prejudices within this book end up coming from. So, that's the review of The Help. I really enjoyed the book, like I've said. I think I've said that a couple hundred times now. And again, I do recommend anyone read it with an open mind, and just to be prepared to have a couple of views changed, hopefully, by this book. So, I hope to see you guys in the next video where I will be reviewing Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, so the British edition. And I will see you guys then. So, keep reading those books and burning through them like the dragons you are. Bye, guys.